Vampires have become a cultural pillar. While the trend and frenzy that surrounded them a few years ago have largely subsided, vampires remain a constant presence in popular culture. Although zombies, witches, and other supernatural creatures often share the spotlight with them nowadays, vampires simply will not perish. They are always lurking in the shadows, ready for their next close-up, and it's clear why. Vampires are infinitely adaptable creatures that allow people to metaphorically explore all kinds of scenarios. They can embody everything from death and destruction to a torturous desire for intimacy and redemption. They can be figures of terror, romantic outsiders, or even outcasts in their own society, depending on their view of life and how they believe they fit into a world overrun by humanity. One thing all vampires have in common is a set of supernatural powers and abilities that set them apart and make them exceptional. These can include mind control, eternal life, and of course, super strength. However, strength can manifest in many forms. Sometimes a vampire's strength lies solely in their ability to fight and defeat any vampire hunter they encounter. Other times, their strength comes from their mental fortitude, enabling them to accept their fate in life or seek a better path. Regardless of how they choose to wield it, the vampires on this list exhibit strength in their own way. That's why here I have compiled the strongest vampires. Without further ado, let's begin with the top 7 of the strongest and most powerful vampires. Number 7. Blade. Eric Brooks, known as Blade, is a human-vampire hybrid who hunts vampires. Before his birth, his mother was attacked and bitten by a vampire, dying during childbirth. As he grew, especially during puberty, he began to exhibit various vampiric tendencies, but without their weaknesses. He was eventually found by Abraham Whistler, a vampire hunter who taught him to control his abilities and hunt vampires. Now, as Blade, Eric works to pursue and prevent vampire plots worldwide. He is known as the legendary Daywalker by vampires, who greatly fear him. Blade is a cynical individual, determined to rid the earth of vampires. He is known for being stoic, cold, and temperamental. Like many in the vampire hunter community, Blade harbors a deep grudge against vampires, primarily due to his mother's death at the hands of Deacon Frost. Being a half-vampire, he has an insatiable thirst for blood, which causes him significant trouble in his youth as he kills and drains many people. Despite his cold demeanor, Blade is not heartless. He saves Karen Jensen, a nurse, from being killed by a vampire and later takes her in as a companion. He holds great respect for Abraham Whistler, his mentor, armorer, and father figure. Blade was so close to Whistler that he couldn't bear to end his misery when he was brutally tortured by Frost and his men. Blade went through an emotional breakdown and depression after Whistler's sacrifice and his subsequent arrest by the FBI, devastated by the death of his beloved mentor. Blade is known to be very solitary, completing his missions alone and preferring not to use companions unless the situation is dire. The only exception is Karen, who was very useful to him and Whistler. Because his mother was bitten by a vampire during the late stages of her pregnancy, Blade possesses all the vampiric powers with only one weakness. He has sharper senses than humans and possesses superhuman strength equivalent to 10 men. He is strong enough to lift 5 tons. He can jump great distances and deliver blows powerful enough to hurl an adult human across a room with great speed and force. His speed and agility allow him to move with great fluidity, swiftness, and flexibility. He can jump several meters in the air and move, jump, climb, perform feats, and run at incredibly fast speeds without difficulty or exhaustion. He can also perform humanly impossible parkour feats and almost always lands on his feet. Blade's muscles generate fewer fatigue toxins during physical activity than any ordinary human. He can exert himself at peak capacity for several hours before fatigue begins to affect him. Like full vampires, Blade possesses advanced regenerative capabilities, allowing him to heal from fatal wounds much faster than normal humans. He can also regenerate limbs and even his head. However, the lost parts of his body will take several hours to regrow. His healing and regenerative powers also extend his life much beyond normal human limits. He also has immunity to sunlight, silver, garlic, and EDTA. Despite everything, Blade still has blood cravings, which he counteracts with strong willpower and blood banks, or even with a serum to nourish his appetite. Blade is a master in martial arts, having been trained from a young age to fight against vampires. He could fight on equal footing against characters like Deacon Frost, Jared Nomak, and Drake using his exceptional fighting prowess. He can also fend off multiple attackers, whether they are humans, vampires, or even reapers. Blade's primary combat form is a mix of Shotokan karate, hapkido, wushu, Shaolin kung fu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, aikido, silat, capoeira, and wrestling. In addition, he has mastered all existing martial arts weapons, with swords and daggers being his main specialty. Number 6. Selene. Selene is a vampire and a former death dealer, sired by the elder vampire Victor after he killed her family without her knowledge. She was born to Hungarian parents sometime in 1383. Over time, she became the first vampire Corvinus strain hybrid and the strongest of her race. Her partner and lover was Michael Corvin, the first hybrid, and together they have a daughter named Eve. Currently, she is one of the new vampire elders alongside David and Lena, making her one of the leaders of the entire vampire race. Selene often appears stoic, serious, cold, and distant, as she rarely smiles and is not known for having a sense of humor. She rarely laughs and has admitted that she is not good with feelings. Usually, she is all business and always gets straight to the point. She is also stubborn and obstinate, even to an extreme, refusing to back down during suspicious activity or until a task is complete. She is fiercely independent, sometimes to the point of ignoring potentially fatal injuries. Her attitude stems from her centuries as a hardened warrior and the trauma of seeing her family massacred when she was still a young human. Being sired by Victor, who was an elder himself, along with her respectable age, Selene's vampiric abilities are much stronger than most of her vampire kin, and they become significantly stronger after consuming the blood of Alexander Corvinus and enhanced by the Nordic Coven's cocooning ritual. She is an experienced death dealer and a clever fighter, regularly displaying a talent for improvisation when facing particularly challenging situations or opponents. She has centuries of physical training, expertise in weaponry, and extensive knowledge in martial arts. By the end of the Underworld saga, Selene is easily the most powerful vampire in the entire Underworld universe, possessing all enhanced vampiric abilities at a level above all other vampires and without any of their weaknesses. Number 5. Vlad Tepes. Vlad Tepes III, also known as Dracula, is the main protagonist and central character of Dracula Untold. Vlad is also the husband of the late Myrna and the father of Ingiras. Vlad Tepes was born in 1431. He is the son of Vlad Tepes II and an unnamed mother. In his childhood, Vlad was a prince hostage of the Ottoman Empire and forced to join the Janissary Corps, a military branch that trained children to fight against those opposing the Turks. During his time in the Corps, he befriended Mehmed II. Vlad became the fiercest warrior of the Janissaries, later being named Vlad the Impaler after impaling thousands of soldiers with spears. Eventually, sickened by his actions, Vlad sought God's forgiveness and left the Janissaries to rule Transylvania peacefully. Vlad eventually met and married Myrna, with whom he had his son and heir. Vlad is a devoted family man, willing to sacrifice anything, even his own humanity, to protect his family and people. As a strong Christian, he sought God's forgiveness after becoming a vampire during the 3-day transition period. Vlad is strong and brave, capable of standing firm against entire legions of enemies in direct combat. Upon becoming a vampire, his behavior darkened, becoming animalistic and primitive in battle, as he is seen roaring and savagely killing his enemies while retaining the skill and focus of a warrior. He became much wilder when he fed on Myrna as she was dying, unleashing an army of murderous and evil vampires for his own revenge and staking and biting the Sultan to death. He was still solely focused on saving his son to the point where he let all the vampires burn under the sun, including himself, just to protect him from danger. Many viewed Vlad as a monster before becoming Dracula, as seen with the Ottoman subject telling the prince that his rage was there, locked in a cage. Although he did not want the power, he seemed to enjoy wielding it. This portrayal of Dracula obtained his powers by drinking the blood of the master vampire, who is the first vampire and his real name is Gaius Julius Caesar, but was also known as Caligula. Upon becoming a vampire, Vlad gained all the typical vampiric abilities, but also acquired more skills not seen in typical vampires. For example, he can transform his body at will into a wolf or a swarm of bats. He can also exert mind control over those with a weak will and has limited control over the weather. Despite being very powerful, this Dracula has a number of weaknesses. For instance, silver can weaken him to the point of leaving him as merely human. He can also die if exposed to sunlight for an extended period, although he can survive longer than the vampires he sired. Moreover, if a wooden stake is driven into his heart, he can die, and if in the presence of a crucifix, he tends to shy away from it, as they have a similar effect to silver on him. Despite these weaknesses, it is important to note that before becoming a vampire, Vlad was already a formidable and lethal warrior who could face multiple enemies at once and defeat them with relative ease. Number 4. Count Vladislaus Dracula. Count Vladislaus Dracula is the first and most powerful vampire ever known, having gained his powers and immortality by making a deal with Satan. He was killed by Van Helsing in 1462. Born in 1422, Dracula was actually the son of Valerius the Elder and lived in the same castle that his descendants inhabited 450 years later. In 1462, Dracula was apparently killed by the left hand of God, but his spirit made a pact with Satan for a new life. Satan agreed, but required Dracula to sustain his life by drinking the blood of others. Valerius the Elder, ashamed of having sired such an evil being, banished him to an icy fortress, sending him through a door from which there was no return. However, the devil gave Dracula wings, allowing him freedom to go wherever he wished. Valerius the Elder then sought God's forgiveness and made a vow for his future generations to kill Dracula so they could enter heaven. However, the descendants of Valerius the Elder were not successful over the coming centuries because Dracula resisted all known forms of vampiric weaknesses and escaped death on every occasion. Dracula is depicted as a very cunning and manipulative man, solely focused on his personal goals. He claims to have almost no emotions like love, fear, joy, or sadness because he lacks a heart, making him feel empty. He only cares about himself, his brides, and his offspring. He didn't show much attachment to his brides, as when Marischka died, he merely responded that he would have to find another. The fact that Dracula thinks he feels nothing makes him even hate himself. He is a lustful and seductive villain, as shown through his interactions with his brides and Anna Valerius. He has a deep desire to kill Anna before she destroys what he wishes to create. However, this is contradicted when he is seen trying to seduce her to become his bride. He also enjoys playing with Van Helsing, who killed him centuries ago. His primary goal is to bring his children to life, continue his vampiric bloodline, and perhaps also recover his stolen red dragon insignia ring. Little is known about his human life or personality. Dracula is the most powerful of the vampires. His abilities are enhanced as he is the first vampire of his universe. He possesses almost all the abilities of the other vampires on this list so far, with the difference that he has none of their weaknesses. The only way to kill him is with the venom of a werewolf, over which he has control. Additionally, he can transform into a humanoid bat form that enhances his physical abilities. Number 3. Dracula. Dracula rose to become the strongest of the vampires and the leader of his race. He despised humanity and was notorious for being a vampire of pure brutality. He was known for impaling his victims and massacring entire towns if they wronged or displeased him in any way. In the late medieval period of Europe and Wallachia, Dracula lived alone in a castle, which was capable of magically teleporting. He had also amassed a vast wealth of scientific knowledge stored deep within the castle. To deter visitors or thieves from entering, Dracula displayed the impaled corpses of his victims at the front of the castle grounds. It was a warning that promised a brutal and painful death to those who dared to ignore it. Initially, this Dracula is portrayed as an indifferent vampire who had grown bored of killing humanity and was solely focused on his scientific studies. Once he met Lisa, he was able to enjoy a happy life, having a son with her and naming him Adrian, who we later know as Alucard. Once Lisa died at the hands of the church, Dracula became a broken, bitter, and vengeful man who tried to kill all of humanity, but he took no pleasure or joy in this, nor did he care about the fact that he could potentially starve his own species in the process. He was so indifferent that Alucard believed Dracula waged war on humanity because he wanted to die, as he was figuratively dead without Lisa. Dracula died as a broken being, but also expressing the remaining love for his son, the greatest gift his beloved wife had given him, which finally allowed him to be at peace as he reunited with his wife in the afterlife. This representation of Dracula is one of the most interesting ones due to his psychological character. Despite being a genius and an immortal, Dracula didn't believe these things were important. He only cared about his family and lost almost all interest in all his possessions except for his castle. In addition to being one of the most interesting characters on this list, he is also one of the strongest. Although he was never seen exerting all his power due to Lisa's death, Dracula stopped feeding for months. However, he demonstrated power and combat ability certainly beyond the range of all others below him on this list. He possesses all the characteristics and powers of the vampires on this list, but once again to a much greater degree. As mentioned before, he is a genius not only in the sciences, but also in magic and can wield it without any problem. Moreover, he possesses knowledge in many forms of martial arts and fights with the elegance and fluidity typical of a master, but never fought to his full potential due to his depression and sadness. Number 2. Vampire Hunter D. D, also known as Vampire Hunter D, is a Dhampir, half-vampire, half-human, who travels in search of the nobility, an ancient group of aristocratic vampires. In almost all the books, it is observed that D possesses superior strength, abilities, and knowledge compared to other Dhampirs. It is hinted that this is due to a special connection with a sacred ancestor. D is generally considered to be his son, though this has never been explicitly stated, and is the result of crossbreeding experiments conducted by the sacred ancestor to halt the inevitable decline of the vampire nobility. Although D's exact age is never revealed, it is known that he is at least 5,000 years old. D originally had an identical twin brother, also simply called D, who, although as strong as the real D, is the complete opposite in personality. D's twin brother is a cruel and humorous being, which ultimately leads them to become enemies. The pair were born in the sacred ancestors' research facilities in the depths of the Sidok village, where many experiments with hybrids took place. At some point in the past, the real D was given the symbiotic entity in his left hand and left the facility, believed to have destroyed it, while his brother was confined by the sacred ancestor. Little more is known about D, where he goes, and whom or what he is searching for. He rarely converses with anyone, except those who hire him to destroy vampires, and even then, he speaks only what is strictly necessary. D has never shown open affection towards anyone, vampire or human. As a vampire hunter and a half-vampire being, D possesses all the typical abilities of a vampire, but highly enhanced. In addition, he has a vast knowledge of sciences and magic, and having lived for over 5,000 years, he has developed an entire catalog of new skills that aid him in his hunts. His powers are vast and increase with each fight. He has abilities beyond the reach of almost all the vampires on this list. For example, he has the ability to enslave humans with just a bite, can sense and communicate with spirits, project his aura to paralyze or incapacitate his enemies, and imbue objects with it to make them more lethal. He also possesses telepathy, telekinesis, and the greatest power of all, which is wealth, due to his centuries of paid hunting. One of his lesser-known powers is his ability to open and destroy wormholes using his sword, and it is heavily implied that D is not subject to the control of fate, which gives him total freedom and cannot be affected by any type of reality alteration. Number 1. Alucard. Alucard is the main protagonist of the Hellsing series created by Kauta Hirano. He is the most powerful weapon of the Hellsing organization, which battles vampires and other supernatural forces. Alucard is no ordinary vampire. It is implied that he is the most powerful living vampire and may be the most powerful character in the series, rivaled only by the captain and Alexander Anderson. Alucard is devoted to his master, Integra Hellsing, and was a good friend of the Hellsing butler, Walter Dornez. He also holds feelings of admiration towards his young apprentice, Ciras Victoria. Alucard works with the Hellsing organization against other vampires and evil forces. He fights with ferocity and often extreme cruelty, rarely killing his target until they have been thoroughly humiliated, while frequently giving enemies more than one chance to kill him, although he only seeks to be killed by a human, having grown bored of immortality and life. As revealed in Volume 8 of the manga, he is Count Dracula, and his actual name is just a reversal of this, with his real name being Vlad Tepes III. Over 500 years ago, during his original life as Vlad the Impaler, he fought in the Crusades to save his homeland in the name of God, only to fail miserably and be decapitated. Shortly after the events presented in Bram Stoker's original novel, Dracula was defeated by Abraham van Helsing and became the loyal servant of the family. Decades later, Abraham's descendant, Arthur Helsing, gave the Count his current name, Alucard. The manga takes place more than 100 years later, where the Hellsing organization is forced to fight against the remnants of a Nazi battalion. Alucard fights with ferocity and often extreme cruelty, rarely firing to kill until his target has been completely incapacitated and humiliated. However, he retains some humanity, as he is still capable of shedding tears and showing affection for his loved ones, which Alexander Anderson interpreted as not being completely lost. Essentially immortal and invulnerable, Alucard is quite arrogant. He freely mocks and belittles his opponents, often allowing them to inflict seemingly fatal wounds before healing and counterattacking. One of his favorite fighting methods is allowing himself to be blown apart before simply reassembling. An example is shown in Volume 2 when Alucard fights Luke Valentine. When Luke gains an advantage over Alucard, victory seems within reach. The tides change when Alucard transforms part of himself into a hellhound. Alucard then blows Luke's legs off with his guns before telling him to regenerate, pick up his weapon, and defend himself. When Luke fails to do so, Alucard devours Luke and declares him little more than dog food. Despite appearing to be a completely invincible being, it is possible to take Alucard by surprise, usually due to his arrogance. In his first encounter with Alexander Anderson, he assumed he had easily killed Anderson with a single bullet, but was surprised when Anderson regenerated. Alucard also expressed deep disappointment because Luke was not a more worthy adversary. In the anime, he seemed concerned with finding a worthy opponent. In the manga, however, Alucard states that he wishes to find an opponent, a human opponent, with enough willpower to destroy him despite his strength. Beneath his arrogance, Alucard is deeply sad and seems to envy humans. Alucard also has great respect for humans who have the strength of will to endure aging and death, because he had none of these qualities when facing death. Among all the vampires in this list, Alucard undoubtedly takes the first place, not only for his great power, but also for his cruelty. This is not one of the most intelligent versions of Dracula, but certainly the most brutal. He enjoys playing with his enemies before violently killing them and absorbing their power. He has the ability to summon these dead enemies to serve him in battle. He is also almost completely indestructible, as he can almost instantly regenerate his body. He possesses telekinesis, telepathy, intangibility, flight, astral projection, can teleport short distances, has hypnotic abilities, can absorb the souls of his victims, and can shapeshift. In addition to all this, he possesses all the other typical vampire abilities, and like all characters on this list, his abilities are on a much larger scale. Moreover, he enjoys fighting using his high-caliber weapons, Jackal and Casual. Alucard of Hellsing is undoubtedly the strongest and most brutal vampire, with all his abilities making it difficult for any other being to rival him. But tell me, what did you think of this top? Do you agree, or would you have done it differently? Let me know in the comments. Hey, don't go just yet. If you enjoyed my video, I'd love to recommend another one for you to watch.